It is. It's time to play Stump the Archivist.
Really? We didn't hear about that.
Yes, you might have said no had it been framed like that.
The archivist.
Our panel today includes 3 archivists from the Georgia Archive staff. Because we are short of staff, I'll also sort of act as moderator here. Tamika, you heard her present earlier this morning. She's worked as a reference archivist at the Georgia Archive since 2017. John Whitehurst came to the Georgia Archives in 2021 from Florida State University, and he has a Ph.D. in history from Florida State. Oh, he came from the Florida State Archives. I'm sorry, I'm reading too fast. And I'm Kayla Barrett. I've been with the Georgia Archives since 1996, and I'm currently serving as deputy director. So, and we.
And he also worked at NARA.
Yes.
So if y'all got NARA questions, he might be able to
yes.
get you to the right place.
Yes.
What's NARA?
That's the National Archives.
Yeah, the National
at
Archives
Atlanta.
is next door.
Oh, NARA. Oh,
Yeah.
NARA.
Nara, Nara.
NARA employees call it NARA.
NARA.
Yes.
NARA, NARA.
NARA, yes, exactly.
Pecan,
Tomato.
pecan, that's what it is.
Our first question that was submitted online is, how do I find pre-1800 deeds for Columbia County? And that's probably was asked because the deed records that are available in Family Search date from about 1847. There are deed records going back to 1791, which was when Columbia County was founded, and those are available on microfilm here at the Georgia Archives. So there's the answer to that question. It's in the, if you do have questions about county records, we put the indexes are all available together, called indexes to records. The index to county records on microfilm here. You can search by county. And this is useful for any county records you're looking for, just to see if there's microfilm, if you can't find it available online in Family Search. Columbia. There is a very useful first card here that tells you when the county was founded. And also these cards have, if there was the dates of any county courthouse disasters, which might explain why you can't find the records, because they don't exist anymore.
So y'all remember how I
right.
did the county like profile or whatever? That's the card.
Yes, okay. So check that. And also Paul Graham has a book on Georgia courthouse disasters. Between the 2 of them, Paul used newspaper accounts and found a couple that we weren't aware of, and then also to get a better idea of what records are missing. I always say check to make sure. Go ahead and look at the cards, because sometimes even though it says there was nothing survived, there may be 2 or 3 critical books or even more that did survive before that date, and you'll find them in the card catalog. So this here, and we go down to Superior Court records. I'm going fast. They're organized by court, the ordinary court first and the Superior Court second. The ordinary has the estate records and marriage records.
So real quick, Kayla.
Yes.
So you guys see the SLC on this card? Right here?
Yes.
That's an indication that it possibly could be on Family Search.
That stands for Salt Lake City. They microfilmed it.
So if you see that on the card, when you're looking at these lists for your particular county, go look on Family Search. So that way you can look at it from the comfort of your own home, even though we do want you to come here. But if you're looking at this at midnight, on Saturday, we can't help you.
And then here you see all of these lovely Columbia County books, and they say AH. That means Archives and History. That means we filmed it. Family Search has some of this film. They do not seem to have this. So if you see an AH and you can't find it on Family Search, you'll have to visit the Georgia Archives. Okay. Second question. Why is it so hard to find Native American history but easy to find the slave narrative on these files? And I'm not quite sure about the question about,
That word.
They did.
That's incredibly problematic.
Yeah,
what, which
When
one?
someone said it's
Slavery.
it's a policy.
Slave narrative?
yeah. You can find the slave narratives on the the Library of Congress's website. But I think she was talking about the comparison between, well,
I'm really not sure. I'm really not
Question.
sure either, because my first interpretation was the difference in the availability of records for enslaved persons versus Native American. But I'm not sure if they're referring to narratives of enslaved person within Native. I'm not sure. Does anybody want to clarify?
No, I think it's basically the comparison between the availability of Native American records versus
Okay.
enslaved records, but it's still not easy. Both of them are difficult.
As far as Native American records go, especially in Georgia, you are not going to find Native American or Indian in any county or federal census records, because Native Americans are not supposed to be in Georgia after 1840 roughly. And before that, in those areas where there are Native Americans, that land has not been settled or acceded to the state of Georgia. So the census does not cover that area, such as the area in northwest Georgia, Cherokee territory. It's not in the 1830 census. That was not covered in the 1830 census. It was not considered United States territory. That's one reason why. They're just not supposed to be there. Another reason why is that Native American tribes control their membership lists, and to get on those tribal rolls, especially for the 5 civilized tribes, you need to prove ancestry to someone on an original earlier census. And that was done with the Miller rolls in Eastern Cherokee and the Dawes rolls for the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma, when the land was allotted to individuals and they had to prove that they were actually a member of the tribe by documenting their ancestry to someone on an earlier tribal roll.
But you can research the dogs.
You can. You can search the applications, yes,
Yeah.
but there are quite a few people in the East who the word has come down through their families that there is Native American ancestry and they can't document it. And that's because it can't be traced to an earlier roll. They're not supposed to be there. So if you want to document Native American, you're pretty much going to have to do DNA if you can't find any link to the tribal rolls. Does that make sense? So we get this question a lot. So we understand the frustration with it, but it has to do with treaty rights and tribal rolls and who is documenting what when. Okay. I found some relatives and print some info. It's just a hodgepodge, I think it's hodgepodge, of info trying to decipher the information. Can I bring in the copies? And is that the question? Can you bring your copies into the archives? Anybody?
Imagine that's what it would be.
That would be my guess. Just wanted to clarify. If that is the question, if you have notes, yes, you can bring them into the search room, into the reference library. You cannot bring in an enclosure such as a zip notebook or a briefcase. You can bring in a spiral bound notebook or even a 3-ring binder. You can bring your notes in. If you find original records that you want to go into the original document reading area, you cannot take them in there. If you need the copy, we will print them out on pretty purple paper for you to look at. But we don't want to mix those notes in with the original records. And most of our records actually are 20th century records in typing paper. So that's the concern there, why we want the notes to stand out from the original records. But you're free to do that. You're free to bring in your laptop. You're free to bring in your cell phone and use your cell phone camera to take notes or to take pictures. And you can bring your notes in just as long as they're not in a briefcase or a 3-ring zip binder. Tamika, did you want to expand on that any?
So you can take pictures without flash.
Yes.
So no flash. So you pretty much covered it.
Okay.
But if there's any questions, the person who's at the front desk can help you.
Yeah, we'll be glad
And
to help
so, just know when you come into the research room, if you get past the front desk and we see you with a bag, don't take offense. We're gonna kick you out until you have to put it in a locker. So don't be offended. We're just trying to make sure we keep the stuff for future generations, okay?
Yeah, so basically just anything that where you, okay.
you.
Right.
Yeah, slip it
Bring
in
your book
and,
stuff.
yeah, slip it out.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Next question, how do I go about securing information from the following sources? This is a two-parter. For my grandfather born in 1900, and the first is the Railroad Retirement Board. They have an SSN issued by the Railroad Retirement Board land. Anyway, Railroad Retirement Board, John will get to that in a minute. I want to go on quickly to the medical records from the old Battle Hill Sanatorium, renamed Happy Haven, and renamed Sadie Mays Memorial Nursing Home, and ultimately renamed Sadie G. Mays Health and Rehabilitation Center. That is not a state-run facility. It is a private nonprofit. So you'll have to go, and they're still in existence. They've got a website as the Sadie G. Mays Health and Rehabilitation Center. So you'll need to contact them about any surviving medical records. And there may be some questions about availability based on your connection to that person, since medical information is restricted by HIPAA. So depending on when they were there, that's going to play into what and how much you can get. John, you want to do railroad?
Yes. All right, so can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. So the Railroad Retirement Board files are going to be next door. And I went ahead and pulled this up. But if you were to Google Railroad Retirement Board NARA or NARA, this is the big debate. You will come to this page here. And I'm going to point to another resource after this, but this will give you an overview of what those records can include. They are like a lot of state records. Some are skinny, some are wide. So you may get more information or less depending on the person, how long they were there. It covers a little bit of that. There's a fee here. I think it's 80 cents a page. But they'll clarify that, of course, when you request this. And then this is the important part, I think, is what we need here. So you would want to have, obviously, their first name, middle name, last name. If you have the claim number, that's ideal, but you'll definitely want to have the social, year of birth, and year of death as well. And so that's how you would request this. I think it goes through an email here. Else working.
I'm sorry, you scrolled so quickly. Is this the?
I apologize.
Is this the homepage that you're on?
This is, if you were to Google, I just Googled Railroad Retirement Board, and NARA, NARA, and this is what comes up.
Oh, okay.
And so, and let me get you to a second source that I think is really useful. We actually had a presentation on this by an archivist next door, Maureen Hill.
Oh, cool.
That was, oh, can I find it now?
It's on our YouTube
All the
channel.
pressure, yeah, it's so much pressure. It is on the, I think it's under events. And then, was it?
It's actually.
That is right there.
Yeah,
You got
she's
it.
Right
got it.
there.
She's got it. Okay.
Yeah. Right here. So we won't watch it obviously with you, but I would recommend watching this. She covers this in great detail, what these records have, how you would request them, what they won't have, things like that. So that answers everything. If anybody's got any questions.
Go ahead and click that.
Oh, thank you.
There you go.
All right.
Okay. And to go back to also the question about Native American records, there are federal records pertaining to, thank you, Native Americans that are available. That information is available on the National Archives website. What census records were taken of individual tribes, what censuses they are included in, and how much information. The National Archives website is very dense. So you may have to do some Googling to find those records, but there are pages and pages of information about Native American records available through the National Archives. Okay. let's see. The question that came up this morning about Georgia colonial records, specifically business licenses. I am not familiar with any business license. And where would you begin a search? One resource to also consider is Colonial Records of Georgia, which is a publication which went up to 39 volumes, some of them published by the Georgia Archives and then later by the University of Georgia Press. And the earlier volumes are actually available through Hathi Trust.
You also have the open library that just,
Okay.
the open library.
Okay.
Comes in a-
Oh, that's right. You-
And the, yeah.
Volumes 1 through 26. This is the one I know about. So if you want to show where that is next. Each volume transcribes a different type of record. Some from the Board of Trade, which the minutes of the Board of Trade, which was actually the board which governed the trustees during the trustee period of the colony of Georgia, and then also the governor and governor's council minutes after Georgia became a royal colony. Both of those have petitions for grants of land. So that is the first place to look in the minutes if you're looking for when someone acquired land in the colony of Georgia to where that petition was issued. And then also the grant registers for the Crown Colony grants are in Family Search. So if you find a reference there are several places to look for this information. But this is good. The questions, the records that Tamika pointed out are also good that aren't necessarily, especially the conveyances, the deeds, and the will records, the estate records aren't reflected in colonial records of Georgia, but this is a great place for land. Okay. How can we access slave importation records?
I'm sorry, what was it?
How can we access slave importation records? Are we may be talking about two different kinds of records here. Are we talking about records of slaves imported directly from Africa, or are we talking specifically about the records that were required by Georgia law when enslaved persons were brought into a county from a state outside of Georgia?
Yes, do both.
Do both, okay.
So Dr. West in her presentation, remember that page that was a slave importation? So that is actually a book that was transcribed by an author. I can't remember what the author's name. Let me see if I can.
Okay, sure.
So I think we have the records, and I say I think, I haven't seen them, but I know we have the book downstairs.
Is that the book by Don Watson?
That's it. That's it. So we do have that book.
Are there other records that you're aware of?
We can check. Try to make this bigger. I don't know. What is this? Is this Crown?
Yeah, Nelson.
So, one of the great things about, having the online catalog is you can go shopping in our resources before you come. And so I'm glad I did this because, the Augusta Genealogical Society just finished this book. And they have some slave importation register information that's been transcribed. If you don't, okay. So we do have slave importation records, the originals. But we also have this book where Don Watson went through and transcribed for 9 Georgia counties. So we probably have some of the originals like this one for Franklin. I'm not sure if Franklin is included in her book, which probably it is. So this right here on the contents, right, all of this, these are the counties that are included in Don Watson's book. So if you have someone who was living during that time, who may have been enslaved in one of these counties, that's a resource you definitely want to take a look at. There's also another resource called Slave Bill of Sale. Uh-oh, can't spell. Late in the day. And this was a big initiative done by the African American Family Association, which was comprised of librarians and others. It was, I would consider, one of the predecessors of the Afro-American, well, the Georgia chapter of OGS. But they have this book, and for whatever reason, let me make it smaller so I can navigate this. There it is. So there's a book that's probably about this thick that records slave bills of sales for various counties, and it's in multi-parts, but they combined it into one book. And we actually have a copy of it downstairs. So if you know the name of your enslaved ancestor or someone who was enslaved, you can probably check that to see if you can, if there may have been a slave bill of sale there as well. So we probably do have importation records. Let me just go back here, and I'm looking at our finding aids.
Was that record you just clicked on, was that just for Georgia again?
Which one?
The book,
The book,
was the book just Georgia?
Mhm.
Okay.
just Georgia, okay.
Yeah, just Georgia.
Well, can we assume, I hate that word, Lord it means, that the archives of other states might have this kind of information?
It's possible, and they might call it something different, but you'll have to check with them. So remember how I talked about the state archives being your first stop, because they're one-stop shops? Check them out. Go to their website, take a look at their website, call them, reach out to them via their email list, like we have, not their email contact list, like we have Ask an Archivist on our website. They might have the equivalent, so that you can reach out to them and ask them those questions, and they can recommend resources that might fit your needs.
They may have done a project like this. It's worth asking.
This is amazing.
So I'm not sure what other terms they could have used for importation, because the interesting thing about the importation records is like on one side, on the front of the book, they have the importation records or it's the free persons of color. So we have the free persons of color register, but then if you flip the book, then it's like the license or something, some other register. So they combine two different registers in one book. So that's been really interesting to see. So anyway, while I'm up here.
Okay, also some.
You talked about tracing Native American ancestry. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs has pages on tracing American Indian and Alaska Native ancestry. So this is one of those resources that you definitely want to take a look at, because it's basically the federal agency that's working with that particular ethnic group. And so that's one resource. And then for African Americans, there's this author named Angela Walton Raji. She actually has a book, and she's done presentations, Legacy Family Tree webinar. She's done it for them, but she also has her own website, if I can find it. But she's one of those individuals whose specialty is Black Indian genealogy. So if you feel like you might have Native American ancestry along with your African American, this is one of those resources you definitely want to take a look at. Then you also want to see if you can view her videos on her webinars on YouTube, because this is one. So it's an hour long, so definitely want to take a look at that. But then she also has some on Family Tree webinars. But if you know anything about Family Tree webinars, once they show the webinar, which is free to view, they have it free for a week after. But after that week is up, it goes behind a paywall. So just take a look at the listing of videos to see if she has one that is listed as free right now. All right.
One other point about, registers of enslaved persons. Let's see. Where were we? Those were registered in the Superior Court, and every county kept their records just a little bit differently. So that what, as Tamika was saying, sometimes you have a ledger like for a persons of color register with another record in it, and that can be confusing. And also, you might want to check if there's not a separate slave importation record. They still were required by law to make that affidavit in the Superior Court. So Superior Court minutes is another possibility where you can maybe find those records. Okay.
I think Ancestry also has the slave manifest, right, for the.
Oh,
people
yes.
moved from state to state. There
Okay.
was a requirement for, they're what's called the slave manifest on Ancestry. So if someone came from Charleston to Savannah, they would have, thank you. If someone was moved from Charleston to Savannah, it's gonna have a list of the enslaver, and then I think it's first names only. It's not very detailed, but there is a record in Ancestry that shows where people were being moved from one state to another. It was a federal requirement.
That's a federal requirement, so it's a federal record.
What's that called?
The slave, I think they're called slave manifests. I can look it up real quick and I'll get you the title. But they're on Ancestry. They've been scanned in, but they're a National Archives record as well, originally. Yeah.
Next question. Where can you find Lawrence, Georgia courthouse records? Are we talking
Lawrenceville.
Lawrenceville? That would be Gwinnett County. What time period are you talking about?
1888.
Okay. The courthouse was operated by the Court of Ordinary for county purposes. Sitting for county purposes. The Court of Ordinary had several different functions, and one of them was to conduct county business. And so if there's not a separate minute book for court purposes, that information is going to be in the ordinary minutes. As far as separate poorhouse records,
With the library, and they have any.
okay, just at the library, did you check Family Search?
I've been a while. But
Okay. They may not have survived, but the first place to look would be I think the ordinary minutes for county purposes, or where they're talking about county business. Okay.
Yeah, I can pull it up if you want. You want me to pull it up, Kayla?
Yeah.
So can we pull up Ancestry? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
I think that's the reference library right there. We got 18,000 tabs.
Good. Yeah. All right, so if you're in Ancestry and you do the search, if you search the catalog, I think the quickest way is to type in just slave manifest. I think Ancestry is really, yeah, you have to actually put the S on. Yeah, they're very particular at the search engine, and Ancestry is pretty particular. You have to put the S in. And it's this group here. It looks like there's a secondary group there for Louisiana. And I believe they're organized, yes, they're organized by city, but you can also do a search for all of them, of course, so.
Because those were ports.
Port cities, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's talking about the Ancestry card catalog. Figuring out how to search by keyword can be really interesting because you don't know what they've named the collection.
That's right.
So if you do find by geographic or something, study the metadata and also how they title the collection, because those are going to be the words that you will use for keywords.
In addition to that, you can try a wild card. So you can use an asterisk.
Okay.
So if you don't know how to spell, use an asterisk, like in the title.
Is it plural or not?
Huh?
For example, if it's plural or not.
Yeah.
Right, so if you don't know how it's spelled, if it's text digest with it just T, or text digest with an S, just put the asterisk at the end and it'll pull everything up.
seen that with Freedmen's Bureau too. That's MAN, I
Oh, yes. Freedmen or Freedman's Bureau. My grandmother was born in Tifton, Georgia, then adopted by family. I believe she was the only survivor of a house fire. I don't know her legal birth name. I can get her date of birth from a family member. What advice do you have to overcome this roadblock? What time did the person who submitted that question, are you here?
I think early 1900s, I don't know the exact date.
Okay. She will not, of course, you know, she won't have a birth certificate.
Right.
When did she die?
I can find that out. I think in Philadelphia, probably in 1960s, 1970s.
She might have a delayed. She might.
A delayed birth certificate, if she applied for Social Security, and this is something you'll not need to know for birth certificates, especially for people born before 1919, if they had to apply for a delayed birth certificate, which you have to do to submit to apply for Social Security, you have to submit proof of birth and who you are. So the process was you would apply to the Department of Vital Records for a delayed birth certificate. And that is going to be filed with the Department of Vital Records by the date it was filed, not the date they were born.
So if you contact Vital Records and ask for a delayed birth certificate, do not say a date before 1919. If you do, they're gonna send you to us and we're gonna send you back to them because we don't have them.
We do not have birth certificates,
So
period.
when you ask for a delayed birth certificate at Vital Records, just say, I'm looking for a delayed birth certificate for so-and-so. Do not tell them the year. Because again, I promise you, we get calls every day from people looking for birth certificates that we don't have because they get sent over here to us from
As
Vital
soon as
Records.
they hear that the pre-1919 date, they say go to the Georgia Archives.
So in
apparently.
addition to that, since she was in a house fire, you might want to check newspapers.
And that's what I thought. I just have to find the dates because it's just so vague and so passed down and somebody told somebody and somebody thinks something.
What location? What location? Oh, it's in
Tifton, so it's Tift County.
Have you tried looking at Georgia historic newspapers to see what newspapers have been?
Well, is that gonna be
digitized?
Valdosta or Albany?
I mean, it could have reached Valdosta too, since it was a house fire.
But you're
And I'll be
saying
in
so
Georgia.
start, but I'll have to start in Philadelphia where she died.
No. If the event took place in Tifton,
But I don't know her legal name.
Okay,
think.
but you know the family's name, right?
I think so.
Because you said most of them died in a fire?
so you don't know if she changed her name after, okay.
After. The people
Oh,
that adopted her gave her their last name. I don't
oh,
know her birth name. But what you brought up was a good factor. If she did get Social Security.
The Social Security, Ancestry has a Social Security death index with her Social Security number and a Social Security application database, which has the key genealogical information. Sometimes that application database has a date, which is when that Social Security card was issued, and that would be the date approximately when the birth certificate would have been issued, if she had to go back and get that. You can also request the Social Security application from the Social Security Administration, which will have that information in it.
That's fee-based.
Yes, it's fee-based, so you're gonna have to pay a fee to get the birth certificate, the delayed birth certificate for Vital Records as well.
so even if you don't know the name, because it was a house fire and multiple people died, it's still like today. If it bleeds, it leads. So check the newspaper to see, because if it was that big, it may have, even if it was in a rural area, it may have reached the next big city. Because, you know, news, they have to fill up the newspaper with news anyway, so definitely look at the map, figure out what's the next big city, and start trying to find a newspaper. So remember Georgia Newspaper Project, the Georgia Historic Newspapers that we talked about in mine? Definitely look at those, so that you can kind of figure out what newspaper may have been, you know, in existence and may have carried a story. Now, whether or not it's digitized and it's keyword searchable, don't know. Even if it's digitized, sometimes it may not be keyword searchable, or the OCR, the optical character recognition that reads the paper may have messed it up. So you just have to be mindful and get in the right headspace, because you might be looking at a lot of newspapers for several months looking for it. So Just try to find that and keep your fingers crossed.
It's also possible that the Georgia Newspaper Project has a list of the microfilm newspapers that they have. And some of the smaller towns have not reached the newspaper project yet. And that late, there may be one for Tift County that would cover that time period. And they may be weeklies as well. But if they're on microfilm, you can maybe get it through interlibrary loan. You may have to go to the University of Georgia to review the microfilm.
And if it hasn't reached UGA, what's the next place you go? It starts with a P. We talked about it. Where you go check out books?
Pines.
Pines Public Library.
Yes.
So check with the library, the main library in that area to see if they have microfilm and if they have the newspaper microfilm for that time. Because if it hasn't
That's
reached
true.
UGA,
Mhm.
then it's probably still locally at the public library.
Mhm.
And if it's not at the library, it could be at the Genealogical Historical Society. So-
They had to keep the newspaper because of legal.
A public organ,
Right.
right.
So they would be either in the courthouse, public library, or historical society. They don't keep those.
Yep, so it goes back to the Big Ten. Y'all know what the Big Ten is. That just solidifies, work on your Big Tens, figure out who and what and when and where. Okay?
The big question is the who, but you've given me some good information to start there with her.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yep.
Next question. Thomas or William Hall got bounty land for William Hall got bounty land for Revolutionary War service in Franklin County, Georgia. How do we find it? You're referring to the land? Where it was in Franklin County?
Yes.
As you probably know, the headright and bounty land was not surveyed the way land lottery land was before it was distributed. The person asking for the land went to the land court and said, I want this land. And then it was his responsibility to go out and have it surveyed by the county surveyor. So if you have looked at any of the headright and bounty land plats, some of them, they're astounding sometimes with the star-shaped, 18 corners, so forth and so on. So platting that land on current maps is very, very, very difficult. I'm not even gonna try that. Yeah. Now, Dan Crumpton did try to plat some of that land in other counties, and he was working on Franklin when he passed away. So they're still working on getting that book published. That might help you. Are you familiar with Dan Crumpton's books? Okay. We have the ones that he already published down in the reference library, and we can show you kind of what those look like. Where he's tried to put the plats on current highway maps to show you where the land is. They're cool, but they're not the easiest thing to use either. So, but we'll show you what you would be looking for when hopefully that book comes out for Franklin County. That'd be my best bet. Does anybody have any other suggestions? Also keeping in mind how much Franklin was carved up after the original county, but Mr. Crumpton did include those, we talked about Richmond, it's Columbia, Bergen, blah, 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 all of those other counties as well.
I do have the worst suggestion for that. It's a lot of work though. So it'll say what waterway they lived on. And sometimes, a lot of times that changes. It could be called so-and-so creek, and you're never gonna know what so-and-so creek was. But if you know old families in that area, sometimes you can kind of connect your ancestor. They lived
On
near
that
family.
waterway, yeah.
Yes, and they also lived on that waterway. This was the old, Hampton place or whatever, and then do that. I mean, it's a ton of work, but it could, it could bear some fruit for you if you could find a neighbor of them who, maybe is still kind of well known where they were. And you can even figure out, okay, this is what they called Wolf Creek is now, probably gone because it's been developed over.
Thanks.
Well, that's all the questions we had submitted. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
For funeral homes, what records are they required to keep and for what period of time and what happens to those records when they go out of business?
You want to lead with the,
Well, funeral homes are private businesses.
Right.
So they decide what they want to keep. They decide, well, I don't know if there is a retention schedule for them because of their business and the license and everything like that. But some funeral homes have, like the Haley Company, the Haley Bell Company funeral home have either sold or donated their collection to a repository. So you can check to see if a local repository or genealogical society, historical society might have the records. Or you can see if they were just renamed and see if they have some records, and you can just approach them. Like I mentioned, Hoggerbrooks. Hoggerbrooks is still on Auburn Avenue. And so, you know, maybe one day when I get the courage to go down there and have a conversation with them, I can ask them, hey, I'm doing such and such. So, you know, you might have to actually go talk to them and see.
if you can Google and figure out name changes where the business was sold, the new business owner may have needed to keep those records.
Right.
And that's one approach, then to contact the current business and see if they have those records. I've heard some of them are very helpful.
Yeah, the county to county, the one funeral home closed.
Uh-huh.
They gave us all the records to that.
Okay. So it's kind of hit and miss.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are there any records that you guys think are underutilized that people don't come in and look for, maybe especially for African-American genealogy?
We laugh.
There are a lot of records. I laugh because some of the records might be underutilized because we have not had the opportunity to touch them. Kayla has mentioned that we're short staffed. So remember how I said we have 90,000 cubic feet. So we have a team of about 5 archivists who process. So we have materials that have been collected over the course of our 100 years of existence, or 100 plus years. So there are times when, you know, we can touch them. Like we at one point had over 70 people, staff members. We now have 5 people who are doing 5. No, actually it's probably, I'll include Kayla, not this Kayla, but the other Kayla. So we have probably 6, 7 or 8 people, less than 10 people who are doing the processing. And so we recently completed a NEH grant, which provided us with funding to hire 2 graduate researchers, but it also allowed us to focus our processing, or at least my processing, on resources that are related to Georgia's response to desegregation. And so because of that, we were able to, and I'm so happy about this, it's a huge milestone. We were able to process and create photo lists for all of the Negro Education Division collection that we have.
And that's been something we've been wanting to do for years.
Yeah, so I don't know how many boxes it was, but it became my own personal mission to do that. And I actually finished it like this month. Yeah. So it really depends upon, you know, what we can focus on, because we have like new collections. We just moved 74, 71 boxes recently. And so we have new stuff that's coming in. We also have the other stuff that's here as well. And so it really depends upon what we try to prioritize. And so we really look at what people are looking at. And so sometimes we have to process a collection on site, like in Oldra, because we open a box and we're like, oh yeah, we can't
make this available, yes.
Because we just had one that was full of newspaper and it was a mess. So we try to make the collections pretty for you guys, because we don't want you to have to, you know, fish through all this newsprint that's crumbling and you leave all this debris and stuff. And it's our way of preserving the records too, because they're in that box for a reason. And if it's in that box, we have to preserve it. So it's just a matter of us finding the collections. Once we know about it, then we in turn tell you guys about it. And so like we've had several people who have asked questions about the segregation records that we process, and we now have more information than we had before. So it's a matter of not only knowing the date, location, and where to look, but also having the patience sometimes, because we have the records. We just don't know what's in them because we don't have the time and resources to make them available.
Sometimes it's a matter of just writing a description of what that series is. Sometimes you need folder listings to really be able to dig down and make those available. And added to that, we got just not too long ago, 240 cubic feet of election records to go through. Actually, the records from the Secretary of State, and it includes both permanent and temporary records. So we're having to sort through all of that. That's a high priority too. So it eats into the time for other projects. Yes, ma'am.
People may not want to know this, but I found a lot of information from prison. I knew that I had an ancestor. I knew where he died. He died in prison. And I contacted the prison and they gave me his entire record. And in that, it showed all the area where he lived. Of course, he went to prison from Florida to Connecticut, but I knew where he lived. I knew the date of his birth. I knew where he died. I knew where the funeral home, but which funeral home he was buried from. And by looking at all of the visitors that he had, you come up with other names of people that you can research, so you know more of that. And the prison records are amazing. Church records, the Anglican Church are required, they're required by law to keep records. And I found a lot of information through the Anglican Church, especially for those of us, of people of color, because it said in one of the church records, first African American to be a member of the church. And so I followed that. So those two underutilized research areas, prisons and churches.
Just to expand on the prison records, Georgia has the Central Register of Convicts, which is the central register from the founding of the penitentiary in 1817 to 1976. It's the log for all prisoners coming into the state system. Ancestry wanted that record, they digitized it and they indexed it. That record was very popular when it first came out. We don't see quite as much use for it right now, but I think my favorite story from that is the patron who she found an uncle in the 1930 census in the central that said he was at the prison, Milledgeville, and we pulled that for her and she looked then and she found him, but not only did she find him, she found two of his two aunts that she had heard the names but never found any proof that they even existed. So they had been convicted when still teenagers and had stiff sentences. And once they served those sentences, they left the state, probably changed their names, never heard anything more about them. But she was delighted because it proved a family story that she had heard about, but really did not know what had happened to them.
And just to piggyback off of that, sometimes you just have to go looking.
Yes.
You may not think that they're in there, just go looking anyway. And just realize that some of the books, like some of these records have been transcribed by earlier researchers. Some of those books do not include African-American voices. They're there, but they weren't included. And sometimes the authors will include a mention of that saying, hey, African-Americans not included in this for whatever reason. And so we are in the books. You just have to go looking for us. So sometimes, we think, oh, we're not there. It's not the fact that we're not there. You just have to go looking for us in those records.
They're with everybody else. They're not labeled as African-American records. So the marriage records, the census records, court records, people are in there. So you just need to think about that. Yes, you have to go looking and there would be records that you might not think of otherwise. And yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know the path that you would take if you know where the person is buried, but you don't know, that there's no gravestone, and you don't know what church that they were a member of,
to find that information where they were buried. And, let's see, the cemetery director that is present says he doesn't have the information and that the local funeral home that exists now doesn't have that record.
So I had a question for you. So what year did they die? When did they die?
1925.
Oh, did you search the local newspaper to see if there's a mention of an obituary?
No, I did not.
Okay, so the thing about, so we are included in mainstream newspapers sometimes, but we're also included in the color sections. So like the Constitution, we were mentioned in different parts of it. So roughly about the 1920s, midway through, the Constitution created a color section for their death and funeral notices. So look at the mainstream newspapers, look for the mentions of the colored community. And I'm saying colored because that's the term that was used during that time. So that's another thing. Remember the terminology that was used. Because if we're looking for Black people and we're thinking we're going to see African American in the 1920s, no, you're not. You're going to see colored. You're going to see Negro. You're going to see COL. You're going to see COL apostrophe D. You're going to see an asterisk. You're going to see a C. So one of the things that we have to do as African Americans is we have to learn the terminology. We have to look at the resources and see how are we captured in that resource. Are we mixed in with everybody else? Do we have a separate color book like many of the marriage books are during that time? Or are we in the back of the book?
Like the tax digest.
Right. Or like the city directories, they use C's, they use asterisks, that kind of thing. So we have a more difficult time, even though the methodology is the same, we have to look at things with a different lens. So we have to look at it, okay, I'm looking at this book, but does it include like COL? Do I see COL notations in the index? That lets me know that we're mixed in. Or is there a separate colored book like Tax Digest? They have one big, huge Tax Digest, but the Tax Digest for African Americans or for the colored taxpayers, there is a consolidation page that separates the whites from the coloreds. So once you start using these resources, you get to know them so that you can actually start utilizing them in a way that makes it easier for you to use. So going back to your question, the time frame might be problematic because the question is, what's the location?
Well, where is the cemetery?
LaGrange, Georgia.
So LaGrange is more of a, I guess you can call it urban to a certain extent. It might be on the cusp, but I would definitely look at the newspapers, see if there is a colored section for the obituaries. See what funeral home may have serviced the Black community. Because my husband works, he used to work at the Lithonia Library of the DeKalb County Public Library. Lithonia is a small city in DeKalb County. They still have a white funeral home, still got a Black one. If a Black person goes to the white one, they're gonna get sent to the Black one. So that's today. So think about back then, it was still the same thing. So you may have to figure out where were the Black people, where were the Black institutions, where were the Black churches, what was the Black neighborhoods? So you may have to look at it from that standpoint. So LaGrange is, what county is LaGrange? Troup County Archives, we talked about that. So they may have more information that can help you. So if you go looking on Google Troup County Archives, and reach out to them, ask them that question because they are closer to the research location for your ancestor and they may have some tips that can help.
Question, are you looking for the location of the actual grave?
I went to the graveyard and found my grandfather, but I didn't find my grandmother.
Okay.
She could be right next to him. She just don't have a marker. Because I mean, the other thing you have to think about too, and D.L. Henderson, who's the reason why I'm in genealogy, she is well-versed in African-American cemetery culture in terms of how early African-American cemeteries, how graves were marked. So that might be something you have to think about too, because sometimes the grave marker was actually a stack of stones, or it could have been something, some other formation. That's not gonna last. Like we see tombstones that are cut in half or breaking and brittle, and those were meant to last. But some of the earlier ones, they would just denote it with, you know, like maybe a stick cross that over time is gonna decay. So it's gonna go away. So she could be sitting laying right next to him, but because of time, her marker disappeared.
Do you have any approximate date when she died?
1925.
Did you find a death certificate?
Yes.
Okay, did the death certificate say where she was buried, the name of the cemetery?
To the very bottom.
Yes,
Yeah,
the, the place of burial is supposed to be on the death certificate as well as the funeral home if that's known. Right, right. Did you see that?
I saw a name. I saw the place of burial.
Okay.
Which is Eastview.
Oh,
What the funeral, it didn't make sense.
okay.
Because it wasn't any funeral home that I ever heard of.
And it may have been, I don't know about that late, but some morticians did not have formal funeral homes. They might be
There were also burial societies.
also burial societies.
One other thing you might want to consider is looking at cemeteries transcriptions from cemetery transcriptions. So, you know, just like Find a Grave, we now have, you know, people going out taking pictures. But the predecessor of that was groups going to the cemetery, writing down information. So it could be that maybe at the time that, you know, maybe they did something in the 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, the tombstone was still there. It's not there today, but it may have been there back then when they took a transcription. So what you may want to do is see if you can find a transcription for the cemetery that you're talking about. You may or may not find one.
And I think Troup County Archives would be a good resource for that, because not only do they have county records, they know about, they're collecting the history of Troup County. So they may be aware if there was any kind of cemetery survey or earlier and transcriptions. So reach out to them. And may also know about funeral homes in the area that are no longer in existence.
Okay.
For a 1925 burial, I would look for the WPA cemetery survey.
Yep.
Okay. There you go. Emma.
I just ran into a situation that she just described. We found a cemetery in a small town, I can't count it, okay, so we find that she's in this cemetery. Somebody in the government is responsible for the management of those cemeteries. So we went back to the city first, and they told us who the person was responsible for it. Cabot County, one of those counties, one of the small counties. That person, looking at her records, can tell you possibly what cemetery, what funeral home that burial was connected to, even though it wasn't on the death certificate. So the funeral home doesn't exist anymore, but we found an old man in the town that knew all of it.
That's really digging. I'm not intended, sorry.
Somebody's always interested in cemeteries.
In this county. Old cemetery, well taken care of, but you go back to whoever's responsible for the keep of the cemetery can tell you the funeral home that was functioning during the time of that burial.
Yep.
Because the director of cemeteries did not know.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell you a joke. It's not really a joke that Dr. Abbott did. So Dr. Abbott, she's a African American. She has a doctor. She has a doctorate, so she has a Ph.D. She's really into genealogy, and she presents on a national level at different institutes. And so she made this joke when I went to SLIG back in 2019 and said that when she goes to courthouses, she looks for the senior people working because us young people don't know much. And I say that and just because she now comes asking me questions. I was like, remember what you said? I'm joking. But
well, you're older now.
Yeah. But sometimes you have to ask some of the more seasoned veterans. Like I still defer to Kayla and Steve because they have experience and knowledge that I haven't gained yet. And they probably don't forget more than I'll ever know.
That's probably, I forgot a lot.
So that's the thing. Sometimes you have to ask the same question, and I know it's annoying because we hate it too. Yeah, we hate it. But you have to ask the same question of multiple people because like vital records, we love picking on vital records. The new hires for vital records may not know, but somebody who's been working a long time may know more. So it's that kind of thing, but you have to figure out how to tactfully do that. Because you don't want to go ask this person and then you ask the second person while that person's still standing there. You can't really do that because they talk. We talk amongst ourselves and we do talk about y'all. So
this is true because I've kind of gotten the impression that that some people have gotten good information and advice from vital records and they're probably the more seasoned person that you have. But we also talk about, we have researchers who will ask the same question saying, they're going to get the same answer. Maybe I'll find somebody else that knows more about that. And sometimes that happens, but often it's going to be the same answer. So she's right about be tactful, please. And be aware.
If you ask us the same question and we realize you don't ask it 5 different ways, we might just do something different.
Well,
just to be facetious, I'm just, that's just me being silly. But yeah, we just try to provide the best information as possible. But you know, I'm being serious. Just see if you can talk with someone older, but do it tactfully, because you don't want to disrespect the person standing in front of you because they still are doing the job. So, but they may not know the answer to your question. And of course, they want to save face and, you know, tell you what they think is the right answer.
And keep in mind that with the labor market currently, there has been a lot of turnover in county and state government offices, and the training to ramp up to speed to provide these services may not be quite as robust as we would wish. They are understaffed. They are also, keep in mind when dealing with especially the county offices, that the bulk of their business is current needs. They need to provide a death certificate. Somebody's asking for it because they've got to file for insurance.
Right.
They've got to file for benefits. They're worried about the here and now. They need a birth certificate for a passport. So the genealogy request, unless there's someone there who really loves genealogy, and that does happen. That does happen. We do need to be tactful and respectful.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, a comment about her. When you went to the cemetery and you were looking to make sure that the grave was beside your grandfather, did you ask the guy that owned the cemetery if he would probe it for you to see if anybody was buried there?
Oh, that's a good question.
And he used the old-fashioned wire.
Okay.
With the two.
He dialed it.
And he said there is a person next between your grandfather and your uncle.
Okay.
But they don't know who it is.
Yeah, you probably will never know who it is, but well, I'm talking about when I went to find my grandmother, the sexton went out with me to the cemetery and he showed me about where he thought it was. He's got an own probe, he sticks in the ground, because once you dig a grave, it never gets hard again. So he probed the ground and he said he thought it was there. He left and I got me a probe and went back. And I went down and I went tap, 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 because I hit the wall. He didn't go far enough down.
So I got a question. I like the supernatural, so I'm just gonna ask a silly question. So what would you have done if you heard tap, tap, tap after you pulled the probe out?
We do get a lot of questions about abandoned cemeteries and asking where those records are, and that can be very difficult, especially if they're little church cemeteries that were abandoned long ago. To find who has those records, especially if the church is no longer in existence, it's hard.
Yeah.
So we hear you. And we don't always have great answers. Sorry about that. Okay, it is 3:20. We're gonna go once, twice. Any questions? Thrice. Thank you so much. We have enjoyed having you here. It's been a great meeting. And I do want to ask you if you could go on downstairs. We've got to turn this room around for the Georgia Archives Institute that is meeting Monday. But thank you so much. We're so glad you came.
Thank you.